not far away. Let's talk story. It's where my mama was born, it's where I come from, it's where my daddy fell in love not long ago.
Aloha, everyone. This is Larry Camp, and welcome to the Nobody Knows Your Story podcast, which just happens to come with a side of Hawaiiana. Nobody Knows Your Story is a podcast which I believe will impact each listener in a positive way. As you listen to the experiences that have transformed, shaped, and guided each guest, perhaps you'll better understand your own personal journey. Some will surprise, some will make you question, and some will inspire, but all will leave you in a better place for listening in. As for the Hawaiiana, well, that's just a big part of my life story. So I invite you to check in from time to time, or better still, add Nobody Knows Your Story to your list of favorite podcasts. You'll enjoy hearing the life experiences of people just like you. Hey, aloha, friends, and welcome to another interesting life story. Now, we just heard kind of what I would call an old school type of Hawaiian song called Nawanipana, performed by Kapalina. And mid-podcast, we're going to hear more of kind of a modern Hawaiian song. The song's actually called Hawaii, and it's from the group Old Dominion. Now, the life story of my guest, Bruce Wasser, will convey like, well, many before, because his story is indeed truly unique. And like all of the stories, we listeners will find parts that we can relate to and parts that will, well, make us reflect, perhaps contemplate, and think about our own life stories. So, Bruce, welcome to Nobody Knows Your Story.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thanks for reaching out. I did take a look at some of the notes that you sent to me, and all it did was just make me believe even more that it was good that I connected with you, because you have an interesting story.
Well, thank you.
So where does your story start, Bruce?
I am a baby boomer child, born in Seattle, Washington in 1949. My mother was the child of immigrants, one from Russia fleeing SARS persecution, the other from Poland, coming to America to seek a better life. My father came from Atlanta, Georgia. He was the grandson of immigrants, grew up in the Great Depression in Atlanta, and served in World War II. He was truly a G.I. Joe. His name was Joe. He met my mom at a USO dance, and they married after World War II. Larry, in this sense, I'm quite typical for the youngsters of the baby boomer generation.
Mm-hmm.
My parents wanted to create a better life. They thought, as Jewish Americans, that education was central to their child's well-being. And we lived in a beautiful community in Seattle. It's called the Magnolia District. About 7 or 8 miles from downtown, Seattle in the 1950s was still a relatively small community. My grandmother lived in the eastern part of the city, very close to Lake Washington. I would see her very frequently. I adored her, my grandmother Rose. I had a wonderful childhood, Larry. We lived directly across the street from a park. Many of your listeners may come from areas where public playgrounds are crucial parts of a child coming of age. And so it was for me. I played baseball there during the spring and summer from really the opening of the day to dusk. We loved playing in the park. And there in that park, I established a profound relationship with my beloved father, Joe. He was, I think now I'm 76, he was the best natural athlete I've ever seen. A natural left-hander, he would pick up golf clubs and play right-handed and play very well. But his forte was football. Injured as a professional football player playing in the minor league Pacific Coast League, my mom, I think, as a precondition of my being born, was that I would never play football. So Dad instead became my baseball coach, and your listeners will know that we would never refer to a baseball coach as coach, but as skipper. And so my dad was Skip. He was a phenomenal teacher, full of aphorisms. He taught us, I think, he taught me the incredible importance of sports as both an opportunity for individual excellence, Larry, but more importantly, as an expression of community solidarity. To Skip, my father, teamwork was extremely important. And as I aged, Dad died when I was 15. He would often come home from work and he would say, "How'd you do today?" And in English, we do not have the second person you, as in Romance languages, as in Spanish. And he didn't say, "How'd y'all do?" But what he meant was, how did you do collectively? How did your team do? And I would talk to him about that. And then he would say, "Well, how did you do?" Meaning, how did you do as an individual performer?
Right.
Team always above the individual, the collective always above the personal. And it was not dogmatic, it was intuitive. And all the ball players on his little league team understood that we played for each other. My father was an imaginative man. He would lean against the corner of the dugout, Larry, and I want your listeners to be able to perceive this. So little league, lean against the corner of the dugout, watching the game, and then he'd turn to us who were sitting on the bench, and he'd quickly ask, "What's the count? What'd that guy do last time up? What should we do now?" We were all players, and so he told us, if you asked how many players are on the diamond, the answer, of course, is nine players on the team. Not to Joe. All of us were on that. All of us were playing. Even if we were sitting on the bench, we were participants in the game. And so he made us understand the cerebral part of sport. I owe a tremendous debt to my father because he instilled in me a lifelong love of sports, but even deeper, a lifelong love and passion for equality and justice. Never talked about it, but it was understood. From my mother, who graduated early from high school, a brilliant woman, graduated at the age of 16 from the University of Washington at 25 Beta Kappa. From my mom, I learned the passion for education. After Dad died, I never became a great athlete. I never was a great athlete. And I found that my great passion would be in either intellectual endeavors or working for what I think your viewers would call social justice.
Yeah. Now, around that same time, I'm 15, right? Your dad passed away. Is
That's
that when you
correct.
guys moved down to San Diego?
I'm sorry, the narrative might confuse the narrative. In the fall of 1963, my dad received an extraordinary opportunity. He was a civilian employee for the General Services Administration. That's the administration that gives out cars to people when they're governmental cars to people when they're coming for government business. He had a chance to have a promotion, but the promotion would move us from Seattle. We had a choice to choose between San Diego and San Francisco. Dad chose San Diego because I could play ball all year there.
Yeah.
So hoping that would be a really good catcher. So we moved to San Diego in the fall of 1963 on a brutally hot day. My father was very conservative, Larry, in terms of decorum. And so on the first day of school, he said, "You wear a three-piece suit to school." Now, I'm a ninth grader, Larry. Nobody wears three-piece suits to school in 1963, but I did. And as my sister Adrian fondly recalls, it was the hottest day in San Diego history. I think it must have been 105 degrees. So here's this kid showing up in middle school in a suit, a three-piece suit on a 105 degree. It was just not the way you want to start middle school in ninth grade.
Well, not only that, San Diego's kind of a laid back place too. I mean,
It was
I
it,
went to junior high in San Diego in La Mesa, but so I know the area, and I know that we wore Levi's and t-shirts. I mean, it might have been a little different in '63, but I was there in like 60, what, 8, 9, 70. So same time, so not too far off.
Well, I have to ask you, did you see Bill Walton play ball when you were in school?
Yeah, he was a couple years ahead of me. He went to Helix High School, and I
Right.
was at Patrick Henry. And I was only at Patrick Henry briefly because then my dad moved us to Salt Lake City, Utah, because he took a job at the University of Utah. So I loved Southern California because that's where I grew up. But then at the age of 15, I moved to Salt Lake. So, but yeah, I remember Bill Walton very, very vividly for sure.
So the reason I say that is I was on a basketball team at Claremont, and Claremont played Helix High School with Bill Walton, and we were obliterated by
I'm sure pretty much everybody was back then.
in the fall of 1963, the wheels fell off, and they fell off very, very quickly. In late November, President Kennedy was assassinated.
Hmm.
It was a devastation for our family. My father had met President Kennedy when he helped organize a welcoming event in Seattle. We were liberal Democrats and crushed by the loss. Within 2 months, my father was diagnosed with cancer, and 14 months later, he passed away. So our time in San Diego, which should have been a very happy time, it's a beautiful city with an extraordinary climate, was not that at all. It was a time of great dislocation and tremendous, tremendous sadness. And that cast an influence over the rest of my life. My father's passing did so.
Yeah, for sure, because you've already indicated what I guess just what a role model and inspiration he was to you. And I know a little bit because some of the things that I've already read about your story, but even you're talking about your mom graduated from high school at 16 and Phi Beta Kappa at 20. Now, I know that you, and I'm not sure you would bring this up, but I'm going to mention it. You graduated top of your class at Claremont 4.0, I think the first to ever even do that, right?
That's
So,
right.
and you valedictorian, right? So you were very bright yourself. So I guess what I'm saying is you took a lot from your parents, and your parents provided lots of opportunities for you that you went on and have done some great things in your life. So, yeah, I definitely can see how losing your father there at that age would be just a really tough thing. And like you say, other things going on in the country at the time and in the world. So it was a tough
Larry, I
time.
think
The '60s are tough.
it was cyclonic. Unfortunately, I was very slow as a little infant, uh, slow to walk, slow to talk. And I think my mom had a group of friends from college from her sorority, and they all thought, and she was the first to give birth of these groups of friends. And I'm sure that they all thought that mom would have this wonder child, and I wasn't. And unfortunately, I think I was always a bit of a disappointment to my mother. I don't think that I now know at the age of 76 that mom was ill suited to motherhood. And to your listeners, many of them will understand this. When mom went to college, opportunities were very limited. They were prescribed for what women could study. Mom was shuffled off into a home economics major, utterly incomprehensible to me now. This very bright, this very driven woman forced to study something that was irrelevant and superfluous to her. Mom was not cut out to be a housewife. She wasn't really cut out for motherhood. That's not an indictment. That's just a statement of truth.
Hmm.
And as a young woman, she was devastated by the loss of dad. It was her husband, it was her romantic partner. He was the center of her life. And we in the 1960s really didn't know how to handle this kind of grief. I liken it to a rock thrown through a window. You see splinters and shards. Our family was really destroyed by dad's death. Now, and this will make sense to many of your listeners. As a teenager, I tried to compensate for dad's loss. First of all, I blame myself. Many children do for disasters that befall their families. Perhaps it's drug addiction or divorce or incarceration or death. It doesn't matter, Larry. Kids blame themselves for bad things happening to families. And I was no different. So I asked myself unconsciously, how can I make up for this terrible thing that I did to dad? Why would he die? And I drove myself in school, just drove myself to be the best student I could somehow that it would exalt his memory. I was not by any question the brightest kid at Claremont High School, an extraordinary public school in the mid 1960s. It was a middle class school. You're from San Diego. You know that Claremont is not an affluent area in San
Mhm.
Diego. But what a curriculum we had. It's almost unimaginable, Larry. We had Mandarin Chinese and professors from Mesa Community College come in and teach history and the calculus. So I worked hard. And that was also an evidence of my father. He hustle, hustle. Don't don't ever let people see you walk when you can run. Hustle. And so I worked hard. I was the hardest working kid in the school in academically, but not the brightest, not by a long shot. And so my academic achievements were primarily because of perspiration rather than any kind of natural brilliance. I'm not dumb, but I was, any number of my classmates were more creative, brighter. They were extraordinary. Claremont High was an extraordinary place in the mid 1960s. I was really proud to go there.
Yeah, I think that what you just said there is something that many parents get frustrated by with their children because the parents can see you are bright, but you're not applying yourself. You, like you say, maybe because of some guilt that you felt, or maybe in a way to even honor your father, you drove yourself. And
That's, that's right.
you wanted to do things that would make him proud, and certainly that's what you did.
At the same time, Larry, and I did something that is kind of a rite of passage for any child who loses a mother or a father. And that is the search for other people who will take the place of of that parent. And so again, these are things I was not aware of, but I sought out men particularly who could provide guidance, who would be like dad for me. Nobody could replace dad, as nobody can replace a parent, but you can try to find surrogates or substitutes. And my first parent, father substitute was my high school basketball coach, Richard C. Dick Eiler, whose memory I revere. Oh, I love Coach Eiler. When I was a sophomore, just before my father's death, I saw Dad talk to Coach Eiler after a ball game. I was a bench warmer on the JV team at the time, and I had no idea what the two of them were talking about, but it was a very serious conversation. No idea. But now, in hindsight, I realized that Dad told Eiler that he was dying and asked Eiler to look after me. And Eiler did. A very handsome, big, strong man who was a basketball star for the University of Utah when he was younger. Eiler kept me on the team. There must have been 100 kids in that school, boys in that school, who could play basketball better than me, easily. I mean, I was horrible, but he found a place for me on the bench. And I was thrilled to be part of two very good basketball seasons back to back, my junior and senior years in high school. And either recognized that if you're going to build a club, you have to have a bench that is pulling for the team and not against the team. So often kids, particularly high school players and now today where we are inundated by statistics and absorbed by individual excellence, how many points a game or rebounds or assists or blocks, analytics flood the market with individual statistics. A coach wants a bench that is not divisive, that is not upset about lack of playing time. And Eiler assembled a deep bench of kids who loved basketball, who knew we were scrubs. We knew our roles. We were never going to play unless it's garbage time or a blowout win. We were thrilled. We were thrilled to be put on the uniform. And so he had just the right blend. He had 7 or 8 excellent players and 6 or 7 kids like me who couldn't play very well, but were thrilled to be on the team. He knew how to build a ball club, and we were cohesive and funny and powerful. It was a great time to be a basketball player. And he served as an important conduit for me to talk about my life, to express frustrations and worries. I would frequently go over to his house. He lived in the same housing development. And I would spend time with his family, playing with his young children. And so Eiler, I'm not embarrassed to say I loved the man. I would have done anything for Coach Eiler. And he would later in my life play a very pivotal role in my application for conscientious objection.
Yeah, and I know that's a big part of your story, but before we get there, I just wanted to say I think that it's important that we have role models in our lives that can kind of guide us in a right direction, especially when we're in our teen years and, we're just kind of figuring things out or we think we're a lot brighter and more adult than we actually are at 15, 16, 17. So even though your father passed, it sounds like he passed the torch to your coach, and then your coach kind of set that example of a good male role model in your life. And so that's important. And I think that again contributed to, how you did turn out, maybe even to what we're going to talk about. And that is, what happened at the age of 20.
I'll take another cold beer from your brother. Got a story I could tell you. Could you drop a pink umbrella in my highlights and make it look like my tie? I'll paint you a palm tree picture, couple fools in paradise, swept up in the blue. We're living life in a movie, just like Elvis and Priscilla and the both of us drinking pineapple rum out of a coconut by the ocean, happy as a ukulele. Yeah, that rainbow we were under. Sometimes I wonder why we ever left Hawaii. Back on the mainland, things ain't the same, man. Wish we could go back to island time. We had a plan to sell bamboo and chimes at a roadside souvenir stand. We had it all in the palm of our hands, but slipped right through like sand in Waimea Bay. We should have stayed swept up in the blue. We're living life in a movie, just like Elvis and Priscilla, yeah, the both of us drinking pineapple rum out of a coconut by the ocean, happy as a ukulele. Yeah, that rainbow we were under. Sometimes I wonder why we ever left Hawaii. Swept up in the blue, we're living life in a movie, just like Elvis and Priscilla, yeah, the both of us drinking pineapple rum out of a coconut by the ocean, happy as a ukulele. Yeah, that rainbow we were under. Sometimes
I made application to attend Princeton University without understanding any of it all about the dynamics of that university in the late 1960s and was accepted. I wanted to study history at the department, particularly hoping to study under a man named Professor Eric Goldman, whose books I read in high school and had a great influence on me. Even to this day, I feel ambivalent about my Princeton experience. I was a public school kid going to a very affluent, storied university. I never fit in, Larry, never found my place there. The wealth of the university overwhelmed me, causing anger and resentments. But I had a good fortune of meeting professors who truly changed my life. The aforementioned Eric Goldman never had children. And late during my junior and senior years, I would often go over to the Goldman's house. Eric's wife, Jo, had cancer my senior year. I would go to the hospital in Princeton and visit her. I think Eric and Jo saw me as a son that they never had. I loved Professor Goldman. My father often said to me, if I'm going to go into a room and be a student, he would say, shaking his head, don't ever sit in the back row, son. Sit in the front row. Make them work. You work, make the professor work. And so during lectures, I'd always sit in the front row. There at Princeton, I met another man who truly was a gift to me, the esteemed Professor Martin Duberman. Martin now is an acclaimed writer and advocate for gay rights in New York City. He's a playwright, a brilliant historian. And at that time at Princeton, Larry, he was the representative of the counterculture and resistance. Oh, did I adore him. Oh my, the influence Martin had on me with his radical approach to education, his passionate commitment to his students. I became devoted to him. He lived in New York City, very unusual for Princeton professors, and I would have office hours on Tuesday and Thursday in Dickinson Hall. I can recall it even now, some 50 years later. Mm-hmm. I would stay outside his door and wait for other students to come in and talk with him and leave and go back in. It was like a dog sitting outside waiting for the master to open the door to let in. Martin, who is gay, I think wanted to talk to me about the difficulties of being homosexual at Princeton at the time, but never did. And I was very naive, and I never really rose to the insistence of being a really good friend to him. I was also influenced where I ate at Stevenson Hall, a non-selective alternative to the hierarchical club system at Princeton. And there I met two men who were also father figures to me. One, John Cahill, who was in charge of the operations of Stevenson Hall, a burly Irishman with a crew-cut, creased pants, beautifully starched shirt, just remarkable, stark difference to those in the counterculture who are dressed rather relaxed. Oh, did I adore Caddy. And there in Stevenson Hall's kitchen, where I washed dishes sometimes 7 days a week, sometimes 2 shifts a day, lunch and dinner, I really found my calling. It sounds peculiar, doesn't it? The idea that I would have some of my greatest joys washing dishes in the back room of our eating facility. There, I met the chef, head cook, African-American guy named Cleveland Cleve Washington. And Cleve truly was a father figure to me. I loved working with and for Cleve. He would always have a warm dinner ready for me at the end of my shift. We would sit down and talk politics, literature, and how often, I think your listeners may understand this, that we overlook or make invisible sometimes the very people who perform the most important functions in our life. Perhaps they're janitors or cooks, or when we go to the supermarket, the men and women who stock the shelves, the butchers, the sales representatives. These are all human beings, all important people.
Mm-hmm.
And Cleve and I developed just such a profound bond. He would often tease me. He would say, "When are you going to get off that skimpy white ass of yours and do something important?" And I would laugh and be bashful and try to live up to Cleve's expectations. All of these men were important to me, particularly as I reached a pivotal moment in my life, and that was in the late 1960s when the Vietnam War was raging. To your younger listeners, Larry, the Vietnam War is an abstraction. It happened so long ago as to almost be non-existent. And perhaps when we think of, they may see Vietnam veterans who may look grizzled. They're in their 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. They're older. They're old men, old women. And they don't realize that once upon a time, we were young. And the United States at that time was involved in Vietnam. The American public wisely began to turn against that war, which was fought, I think, for all the wrong reasons, all the wrong circumstances. And the young men and women, the men who were fighting and the women who often helped assist, were sent to a country that was, I think, a part of Vietnam, where there was a civil war inside a civil war, making it impossible for our soldiers to know who the enemy was. And if you don't know who your enemy is, then it's possible to become calloused to the suffering of the people who are there. And your allegiances are no longer to some abstract idea, but your allegiance is to get home, to leave in country, to come back to the United States. I could not fight in that war. As early as 1968, in the summer of 1968, when I was a freshman, I made application for conscientious objection. To your listeners, conscientious objection means a person whose ethical system, religion, whose conscience forbids him or her to fight in a war. And our selective service system has provisions that exempt people who, for reasons of conscience or religion, cannot fight. Up to 1968, that was strictly a religious objection. And only a very select number of small sects would qualify. We call them Quakers, but the Society of Friends, the Mennonites, the Seventh-day Adventists, they belong to formal religions that prohibit fighting. Well, I was a Jew. I'm a Jew. And Jews don't have any prohibitions against fighting. And my draft board was in San Diego, an extremely conservative military city. I didn't really think about would I become a CO in 1968 because I had what was called a student deferment. That means that those men who were going to school full time did not have to face the burden of being drafted or going to the war against their will. Now, quickly, some of your viewers are going to say, well, that's on its surface, that's not fair at all. What about kids who didn't go to school or didn't have the money to go to school? And your viewers would be right. It is discriminatory. It does favor the affluent. And in those days, that would mean largely white kids like me. But I kept my student deferment, not really thinking about being a CO because, maybe the war will be over by 1971. In December of 1970, we had a draft lottery. And the draft lottery at that time was done by President Nixon. On the surface, a lottery, your viewers know what a lottery is completely impartial, dispassionate. The draft was 1969, in December of 69. It was also a calculated ploy by President Nixon to siphon off dissent, which was growing particularly on college campuses. A lottery would mean that the capsules were drawn, and in those capsules would be your birthdays. And on a completely random basis, your birthday would determine whether your susceptibility to the draft. Low draft numbers meant you would be drafted, and in those days, probably you feel you'd be sent to Vietnam. High draft numbers meant that you wouldn't be drafted. You could live your life. You wouldn't be burdened by the terrible choices that have to be made. Politically, it was a very shrewd move by President Nixon. On the surface, it's completely egalitarian. It's random. There's no prejudice here. But you're siphoning off at least a third and perhaps a half of all college students who may be angry at the war. But if you're not going to that war, you're not going to feel as strongly about it. You can go to law school or medical school, get married, get a job. You can do what you want. You're not going to be sent overseas to die. My draft number was 90. Not a good number. And on that December night in 1969, I was a junior. I realized that within 2 years, I would have to prove to the draft board that I was indeed sincere in my beliefs, that the application I made in June of 1968 was not a whim, was not trying to get out of an unpopular war. And I felt I had no chance. Guided by my dearest friend, one of America's most capable and brilliant lawyers and author, James B. Lieber. Jim helped guide me to say that in showing me recent Supreme Court decisions that expanded the idea of religious objection to war. And instead of being members of a faith, you had to have a value system or ethical belief system that was equivalent to a religion. This was an open door, Larry, a chance that I could become a conscientious objector. But as I found out from wonderful conversations with the clerk at the San Diego Draft Board, Marianne Blom, that my chances were very slim. And unfortunately, and understandably, my mother never supported me and several times tried to intervene on my behalf, up to and including calling San Diego's local congressman to see if he could put pressure on the board to get me out of the draft. This was a terrible thing for a mother to do. I mean, terrible on two levels. One, it's interference. The draft board is going to be furious with people on that. So that was going to backfire her very desire to help. And the second was not an ability to listen to me, to hear me. She was terrified. She had lost her husband, and now she feels she's going to lose her son. I have no anger at all toward my mother now. I have only the most tender feelings of sadness. She must have been absolutely terrified. And for those of your listeners who are parents themselves, those parents would do anything to protect their children. Anything. I understand that. I'm a father. I'm a grandfather. I know what those feelings are. You don't want your children or grandchildren to hurt. You want only the best for them. Even so, that it may blind you to what is best might be just letting them find their own path. I had made peace, Larry, that San Diego's draft board was not going to grant me conscientious objector status. I made peace with that. I made peace, although I was frightened that I was going to go to jail. I would never have left the United States of America, my home. I am deeply patriotic. I love this country. I'm aghast at its flaws. I'm incensed by its cruelty to ethnic and racial minorities, but I love the country. So going to Canada, fleeing to Europe was never an option. Going underground, avoiding the draft, that was never an option, Larry, because somebody else would have to bear the burden of my decision. So I was reconciled that I would not be able to go to law school and that I was going to be a convicted felon. At that time, that would have been shameful to my parents. It would have been brutal to me. I wouldn't have been able to be a lawyer. I wouldn't be able to vote. but it was what I would have to do.
I think that if I'm speaking for the listeners, we want to hear the rest of the story.
I had a thick file asking my friends and professors to write on my behalf, but perhaps the best letter that went to the San Diego Draft Board was from Coach Eiler. I met Coach Eiler at, of all places, West Point, the United States Military Academy, in a hotel. He had become a high school administrator, and there, in the shadow of America's military might, I engaged in a conversation in which I asked Coach Eiler, who was then what was called a hawk on the war, if he might change his mind and become what I was, a dove on the war. He was deeply disappointed that I had made application for conscientious objection. He would say number 11, that was my basketball number. I was surprised he remembered. He said, number 11, that's not the man I remember from high school. He said the man he remembered was the one who would give anything to his team. Even if he didn't understand what the team needed, he sacrificed for the team. That's what the country's asking, he said to me. The same thing he asked when I was on his club. He was disappointed in me. He said my father would have been disappointed in me. And we left on a very cordial note. But when I went back to Princeton, I was heartbroken that my coach, I was disappointed in my coach. I asked for a letter on my behalf. I mean, he was the person who knew me perhaps better than any other person. And he sent me a copy of the letter, Larry. And it was a well-crafted single-page letter to the draft board in which Coach Eiler advocated strongly that I should be granted CO status. He overcame his own disappointment in my decision, his own political predispositions, to argue that my character was honorable, and that even though he disagreed with me, that he said extreme consideration should be given me. To my shock, I became San Diego's first non-religious conscientious objector. I got the status. I was flabbergasted. The clerk, Marianne Blom, with whom I had established a long and deep personal relationship, I learned eventually that Marianne Blom exercised power as a secretary. Here's an aside. My father always told me, he said, son, when you're going into office, look who the secretary is. That's the one that's running the show. And Marianne Blom, because I had repeatedly visited with her and talked with her, Larry, went to the members of the draft board and told them, don't even bring this guy in for questioning. He's sincere. Don't waste your time on the file. Grant him the status and do other work. So I didn't know that at the time. Marianne later told me. That's strictly a violation of protocol. You know, the draft board has to interrogate people. She said, don't waste your time. So I got the status as a CO and had to find alternate service work. I was accepted to Stanford Law School and gained employment at the Palo Alto Veterans Administration Hospital in there. I was a laboratory glassware washer, thus finding all the years that I had put in at Stevenson Hall washing dishes did come to some good use. When I went to see the dean to ask for, in effect, a deferral of my admission to the fall of 1973 instead of the fall of 1971, he hemmed and hawed and told me that no, Stanford would not grant me automatic readmission. And when I questioned him, I found out that if I had gone to the military, I could be deferred. Had I become a minister, I could be deferred. Had I gone to work for the Peace Corps, I could have been deferred. Had I gone to work for Volunteers in Service of America, Vista, I could be deferred. Had I worked on a farm, I could be deferred, but not as a CO. And it was the only time in my life that I used intemperate language to a teacher. Remember, I was raised to be respect teachers.
Mm-hmm.
I have reverential feelings toward teachers. And I used profane language to the dean, describing my unhappiness with that decision. As I washed glassware for 2 years, I reevaluated my life and I determined I did not want to become an attorney. I love kids and I decided to become a teacher. And that's what I did. For 33 years, Larry, I taught a wonderful group of young men and women in Newark, California, a working class community in the San Francisco Bay Area, the East Bay, halfway between Oakland and San Jose. And I loved my life in Newark. I became, I think, a storied teacher there. Probably not the best teacher, but a teacher who loved his kids. And I had, I think, an intuitive sense toward those kids who were suffering. I think the crucible of my own experience permitted me to sense out those kids who needed extra comfort, who needed extra care. And they came to me kind of like metal filings to a magnet. I loved them. I lived in the same city. At that time, I gave out my phone number to my students. I told them they could call me whenever they wanted to. They knew where I lived. It was fun. It was great to be part of the community. I would tell my students that a doctor never stops being a doctor. A religious rabbi or minister or priest never stops being a priest. I will never stop being your teacher. I will be your teacher every day while I'm here in my classroom, and I will be your teacher the rest of your life. And that's the precept that I had. So I became a loving presence in Newark, where I had a terrific career. And I am thrilled that I made that decision.
I can't help but think about Coach Eiler and how he lived in your same neighborhood, and he was there for you. And it seems like, we both know from just what you've said that had a real positive effect on your life. And, both of my parents were school teachers. And I remember my mom saying to me, this isn't a job where you make a lot of money, but the reward for me as a teacher is when you're able to take a young person who is not understanding a concept and help them to a point where they get it, and to kind of become, like you just said, these kids look at you now and they still have, I'm sure, fond memories. And they still, as you're reflecting on some of your past teachers and professors and people who made a difference in your life, you are now that person to these kids. And I know that that's the part for my mom and my dad that they really enjoyed also as teachers.
Yes, I think that's true. I never entered teaching with the understanding that would occur, Larry,
Mm-hmm.
but it did, and very happily so. Most of my teaching dealt with American literature or American history. I wanted my students to gain a voice, to be proud to stand alone, if necessary, in a class defending a point of view that might be unpopular, to understand the character of the American people, to resist racism and sexism and homophobia, to denounce wrong, to live up to the precepts of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when he said the greatest glory of American democracy is the right to protest for that which you feel is right. And I tried over the course of my career to find techniques to give kids voice and courage. And I did so, Larry, in the most unusual fashion. It, it wreaked havoc on my body, but I often taught on my knees. And when I taught on my knees, I'm now literally on the kids' level. They're all sitting in seats. So I'm on their level, and the bright kids immediately understood that that was a very egalitarian measure, that I'm not above them. Well, I told the kids early on that I would never have them raise their hands if they wanted to participate. Oftentimes, almost affectionately, I would say, well, when you're at lunch or you're hanging out after school, when you need to talk, do you ever raise your hand to be acknowledged? And they looked at me like I was crazy. "Oh, no, we never raise our hands. Well, I asked, well, how do you figure out who's going to talk? And they laugh and they say, well, we know how to do it. We will figure it out. And I said, well, that's what's going to happen in this class. If you have something to say, you have to stand up. You have to stand up. I would look at them. So you have to stand for something. So it's both literal and metaphorical.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they did stand for something, and there may be 5 or 6, 7, sometimes 20 kids would stand up, they'd figure out how to talk. They'd police their own room. They would, you can't hog the conversation, they'd say to somebody. They'd say it, not so many words, but you can't hog the conversation. And then they understood, perhaps for the only time in their life, and these are young men and women, they're 15, 16, and 17, they're on the cusp of adulthood, that they have, for the first time in their life, a teacher looking up at them instead of the other way around. That's, to an adolescent, extraordinarily empowering.
Yeah, and very different.
Very different. Now, other people say, well, that guy's been left in the oven too long. He's just nuts. That's just ridiculous. But the kids understood.
Yeah.
They understood. And I would scuttle around on my knees. Sometimes I'd get up if it were a heated discussion, and I'd always stand with the 1 or 2 kids who were taking the minority position. Always stand by them. Sometimes I put my arm around their shoulder. Say, don't worry. Got to face the hurricane. You got to stand. You're standing for what you believe in. You've got a voice. Use it. And I think I taught those kids what it means to have an American character, to stand for something, to represent equality, to have a dignified voice, that you can disagree with your buddies, disagree vehemently, and still be good buddies with them. That everybody has a name. And perhaps the most wonderful thing you can do is, if you're arguing, or as the kids would say, having a beef with somebody, call them by their name. Larry, I don't agree with you. Larry is going to say, I don't remember anything that Joker said, but I remember he called me Larry. He knows my name.
Yeah.
He knows my name, or she knows my name. And so these were just galvanizing moments for kids. They would come into class. I would shake each of their hands coming in. I would shake each of their hands going out. I'd start every day. The kids, when I was sick, the kids knew the routine, telling what the importance of a public education is. Our schools never close their doors to anybody. We are an inclusive community. We celebrate our differences. Now, our president disdains what he calls DEI. That was my secular prayer every morning. We believe in equal justice. We are a diverse community here in Newark, and we are all members of the same community. They knew it. When substitutes would laugh because their kids would imitate me, they knew the prayer. It's a secular prayer. Every day. Don't ever forget while we're here. Don't ever forget it. That was my father's influence. Know who you are and what you are. And so through the generations, Dad has echoed. He'd echoed every day in my classroom. Kids didn't know it, but he was there. And so that was a great and happy and liberating personal experience to become a teacher.
Before we end here, Bruce, I wanted to at least point this out. You have a book out, and I think that the listeners would really find this interesting. And it's called 90, A Conscientious Objector's Journey of Quiet Resistance. You talked about it a little bit here in the podcast, enough to, I hope, get the listeners to want to maybe go a little deeper into that story.
I'd like that very much. I think it's a wonderful coming of age memoir.
Mm-hmm.
It's a memoir about parental loss, a memoir about surrogate fathers, and it is a memoir also of quiet resistance to that which is wrong. I think it's a very engaging read.
Yeah, well, for sure. I think I'm one who loves to read. I've got probably 7 or 8 books on my shelf right now that I have picked up over the last, couple months that are waiting their turn. And I can promise you this, I'll be picking up your book.
Oh, thank you very much, Larry. And thank you so much for inviting me to spend time with you and your listeners. I'm deeply appreciative.
And thank you. Thank you for taking the time and telling your story, Bruce. Okay, everyone. Well, we don't know when the next podcast will be because I'm not doing them on a regular 2-week basis anymore, but I can guarantee you that when it comes out, it will once again be an interesting story. Aloha, everyone.
Down a little old country road not far